all very much preoccupied with the day-to-day, and today's about power to the north and city deals, and what's happening here and now on the ground in the north. What I want to try and do is to kind of step back a bit from the day-to-day issues that you're dealing with and try and put that in a wider context, and that's very much what we've sought to do through the devolution inquiry. And the thesis of the devolution inquiry, which kicked off in July of last year, is that essentially we have in this country a very piecemeal and reactive approach to devolution that doesn't really deal with the issues in a coherent way across the whole of the country, and in particular tackle the issues in different parts of the UK. And what we felt was therefore that we needed to look at how you could achieve long-lasting devolution and constitutional reform that was coherent, consistent and sustainable into the future. So that's essentially the brief of our inquiry. And we've been delighted to make a connection with Sperry, to be, in a sense, using this event today to be part of the evidence gathering for our inquiry. That's how I see today in this particular session. So I very much want to get your views on what I think are these fundamental questions. Now, the review is all party. It's got people from central government, from the Lords, from the Commons, and it's also got people who've worked in local government all their lives as well. So we've genuinely tried to put together a panel that reflects all of the key interests in this debate. We've also taken evidence from a very wide range of people. So our first evidence giver, and he was very powerful, I have to say, was Gordon Brown, who spoke very eloquently about his views on devolution in the widest sense. But we've also had the CBI there, community and voluntary organisations. We've had the Community Secretary, Greg Clark, and in his opposite number. And we've had a number of constitutional experts as well. So we've finished our evidence gathering now, and we're looking to pull that together into if you like, a wider set of ideas that we can report on. What I thought I'd do is just pick out some of the key themes that have come out of our inquiry so far, and some of the questions they've raised, for which we're in the moment really reflecting on the right answers to. And I think the first and most significant theme that's come out is that this issue of devolution in England, which is essentially what we're talking about, that we've heard from Martin on, sits within a much wider set of constitutional challenges for the UK. And the person I think who's probably set this out best is Vernon Bogdanow in his paper for the Constitution Society. And I'd recommend, if you have any interest at all in this debate, that you go and have a read of that. Because what he points to is a whole set of huge challenges. Do we keep the Union, in effect? Is the Union going to survive? Is our membership of the EU going to survive? What about an English Bill of Human Rights? How do we sustain a voting system that gives majority government, majority power, to a party that achieved less than a quarter of the electorate's support, in effect, the total electorate support? These are all very big constitutional questions in this country, of which one is, but it's only one, devolution in England. So we really have to think about this, because each one of these issues, and Vernon puts this very well, are interdependent. So if we have a vote to leave the European Union, you could pretty much say that'll be the end of the Union in the United Kingdom. I think that's almost certain to follow from one from the other, whatever protestations we hear from the government. So you can't decouple these different constitutional issues. You can't think about what happens in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and not also think what happens in England as well. So the first and key point here is, how do we comprehensively deal with these issues? And Martin raised the question of a constitutional convention. A significant number of our witnesses gave us a view about the need for a constitutional convention. And actually, personally, I have to see whether the panel's in the same place, I think there are good arguments to do this. And here's a point that Gordon Brown made. He pointed us in the panel and he said, but it's not going to be made up of you, was his point. sort of personalised, I thought, but there we go. The point he was making was it needs to not be the great and the good. And how do you create a panel that actually genuinely brings in the widest representation of people, ordinary people, and is not a great and a good exercise. At the same time, you want a convention where what it reports, actually those who do have power listen to it and take it on board. So number one question is, we have a constitution that I think is in serious difficulties, and I don't think, and many of the evidence givers said, we can just muddle through and hope for the best on this. So that's point number one. Point number two is, what is the purpose of devolution? Why do we think devolution is a good idea? It might be dead obvious to you in this room, and in one sense I would say it's obvious to me. We have an excessively over-centralised country by comparison to Europe. But if you're sitting in central government, you've got to have a sense of what's going to flow from this change, really. Why would you invest the time and effort to make it happen? Now, I would say in England, the arguments have been predominantly about two things. Number one, economy, that it would lead to faster growth through devolution. And that's absolutely where Osborne is, the Northern Powerhouse is, and so on. So that's point one purpose. How would you measure that success when, again, as Martin really very well elaborated, devolution sits along a whole set of other things that are going on. So how do you decouple devolving through these deals, city deals, with what's happening on welfare, with what's happening on training and so on? The second thing that's emerged over more recent times is public service reform, that somehow or other through devolution you can unlock very big issues such as the integration of health and care and managing the huge pressures on our healthcare system. Again, there's a clearly articulated case for it. I think there is merit in looking at that, but that's a second clear purpose. But interestingly, of course, we think of those as the two drivers in England. In Scotland and Wales, it was entirely different. It was about identity. Who did you belong to? Who did you see as and associate with? And it's interesting that identity politics has hardly featured in the English debate. Really very interesting for me. It has, if you like, been a functional debate rather than a debate about identity and belonging, really. Does that matter, or should we move on from that? A third issue that's come out very clearly in our work, really, is the prospect of devolution, can you, put it another way around, can you rebalance through devolution? Is devolution enough to deliver the kind of rebalancing of the economy that we're looking for? Geographic rebalancing, I mean, here. And actually, there's a very big question to be asked about that. And in fact, if you talk to Jim O'Neill and you read his report, which I suspect many people haven't, it is a very good report, I have to say, he will say that devolution is only one part of how you rebalance. That actually investment in national infrastructure and national things is also going to be incredibly important. So there's a serious risk here that we rest our whole argument on devolve and it'll all be all right. Give us the money, give us the powers, and we will sort the imbalance of this economy in this UK situation through this. I don't think that's entirely the answer. And the question then is, what's the right mix of central and national investment intervention that's needed to rebalance? And just to be aware, and Sperry have, I think, analysed this and set it out very clearly, we're not moving in the right direction on this. The numbers, never mind the rhetoric, the numbers tell you that we're becoming more imbalanced. So we're not having to just accelerate a process that's moving nicely towards rebalance. We're having to reverse a trend, really. And this is, the question is, how powerful can devolution, the sort of devolution we're talking about here, really be in these wider economic forces that are going on? I think a fourth point I wanted to pick up is that, and a big question is that we have a very different approach to devolution in England than there has been in the case for Scotland and Wales. So in Scotland you have a very powerful devolution model, which is essentially what's called a reserve power model. In Wales, actually, it's not that. Wales has to argue for devolution. In England, it's a different model again. And I think Greg Clark put this as comprehensively as well as I could have seen anybody do. When I asked him what's his destination on devolution, he hasn't got one. He does not have a destination he's trying to reach by the end of this Parliament. He doesn't have a plan, in one sense, about where he's trying to reach. What he would say is that devolution has been bedeviled by trying to come up with general arguments on devolution, so what should be local, what should be national, and it falls apart because people will say, well, Manchester might be able to handle that devolution, but I'm really not sure they could do it in Birmingham or somewhere else. And so his view is that you'll make better progress rather than having a kind of plan and a set of intentions, a destination or even a route map. The best way to think about this is to have a general goal of devolution and actually do it deal by deal, place by place, argument by argument. And he may have a point, truthfully. Could we have made the progress that Manchester made trying to do that as a national exercise? I'm not sure. The combination of forces there probably drove that further and faster than it might otherwise have gone. But there are drawbacks in this model, I have to say. One that everybody knows about is that the Chancellor is quite clear that devolution links to mayors. Again, Greg couldn't have been clear about this in the meeting. He wants to achieve devolution that goes beyond cities and beyond mayors, but it's going to be cities first. So all those people who've put in bids from other parts of the country are going to have to wait. This is a party where everybody's been invited, but only about 10 people have been let in to the party. The rest are kicking their heels outside saying, when are we going to be able to come and enjoy this party? They're not for a while yet. That's a really important point. Talk to them and they'll tell you about their frustration. So we've created an expectation here that isn't going to be fulfilled for a while yet. Second point about this model is, trust me, it's incredibly hard to break down the resistance in government through a kind of case-by-case basis unless you have an incredibly powerful advocate. The Chancellor can do it because he's powerful. Try doing it in other places in the same way. And it's because, and civil servants, somebody asked me why is there that resistance. Let me just give you one reason why. It's because civil servants, A, look upwards to their ministers, and B, they think national programmes. And devolution is intrinsically disruptive. This is the most crucial point I would make. If you're running a national programme, and I remember this, I was in a meeting with Permanent Secretary. I won't name the Permanent Secretary, I'm not quite that free and flowing yet. But he said to me, we were talking about local growth deals, and he said to me, look, Bob, I said, I like this local growth stuff, it all looks very good, but what it cannot do is interrupt my national programmes. And I said to him, X, that is the point. If it doesn't do that, we're wasting our time here. So you've got to realise there are some very powerful headwinds, and punching through place by place, case by case, is hard work, I think. The second thing I'm not sure that it gets you to is how do you get the fiscal devolution right with the powers devolution? The answer at the moment is to say, well, we're giving local authorities 100% of business rates. We're going to hear about localising the business rates from Paul later on, and it sounds a fascinating presentation, but trust me, as somebody who's worked sadly on business rates longer than I should ever have done, this is not a straightforward or easy system to do, actually. And it has many quirks in it. For example, we've not revalued forever, and if we did, it would lead to a shift of money from the south to the north. No question. The south would pay more, the north would pay less. It's unfair at the moment, but trust me, trying to do that is a big issue. So this is not an easy or solid platform on which to do the fiscal devolution. This is my point, really. So there are quite big questions to me about whether this case-by-case model, deal-based model, can deliver. It might deliver for individual places. Will it deliver for the England is an open question in my mind. And it's certainly not going to deliver quickly. The next point I pick out really here is, should we have in this devolution debate, again a point that Gordon Brown articulated very powerfully, some guiding principles about devolution. It's interesting, those places who have gone into negotiation, like Cornwall, have said that when it's the kind of front door says it's all open, it's all a discussion, bring everything in. In truth, when they get inside this party, quite a few things are off limits. They've taken the Guinness off the. To take the metaphor a bit further than I should have done probably, but you get my point. Education is not in play. You'll find that out very quickly when you get in the room, and so on. And the question in a sense is, do we have some guiding principles here? So are we saying, for example, that devolution to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and in the England has to be on the basis that we keep an NHS free at the point of delivery? Is that a guiding principle? Because some have raised the question. The voluntary community sector said, we're not sure. If this devolution means we move away from that guiding principle, we're not happy. So I think there is a case for saying we need some very clear guiding principles for the whole of the UK on devolution. But easier to say and harder to debate. Let me make and finish soon with some other points. The next key issue that has come up consistently is, how do you square devolution with equity? How do you do that? Take business rates as an example. The billing is local government will keep 100% of its business rates. Trust me, Westminster will not keep 100% of its business rates. If it did, the rest of the country would suffer massively. So you're going to have a system of so-called top-up and tariffs that moves the money around. You cannot do it any other way. So how do you get a model of devolution that balances it with equity? And equity works in two ways here. There's really two very important concepts of equity. The first is, where do you start from on equity? I am a great fan of Amartya Sen and his concepts of capability, that you put people in an equal position of capability to do things. And that's the issue of redistribution of resources, and a starting point that gives, if you like, Leeds the same chance to succeed as Sheffield or London. That in itself is difficult. The second kind of equity is equity of outcome. Now, by definition, devolution of power will give you a postcode lottery. There is no way round that question. If you don't get differences in outcome, and you don't live with those differences in outcome between Sheffield, Manchester, Leeds or London, once you've got your equal playing field and people have got off and are playing on the pitch, then it's not devolution. A consequence of devolution is that you will get different outcomes. Can we live with that? Where can we live with it? We can live with it because we've got different. Most people wouldn't mind if the library service is different in Sutton than it is in Sheffield. But would they live with different care? Would they live with different economic outcomes? Where do we accept postcode lottery or postcode outcomes, and where do we not accept it? So equity, you cannot deny the force of the issue of equity in the agenda and debate about devolution. Two or three last points really. I think there's a big issue for me about how does devolution work in a way that genuinely derives power down to the lowest possible level. Now, when I was in Sheffield, I used to rail against the remote and central government and the way it took its decisions. I have to say I did it less when I was head of the civil service. But the point I would make on this is that I could do that. I was doing it in the knowledge that people in parts of Sheffield would feel equally about Sheffield City Council. Do you see my point here? So, and one of the paradoxes about devolution is devolution may go to a certain level. So if you take Scotland and Wales, the local government there are very concerned that in those places power has moved upwards. So they've seen centralisation. Talk to people in Scotland about what's happened in Scotland. Do they think this is devolving of power? They say we've got less power than we used to have in Scottish local government, not more. So how do we square this question of what level does devolution happen? Are we comfortable with a model where devolution stops at a certain level? And then linked to that, if it does stop there, how do we get proper accountability for these models? How do we get LEPs, how do we get combined authorities to be genuinely open and accountable? Given that they are, in reality, you cannot duck this, whether it's a mayor or a combined authority, another level of government. There's no point in hiding the fact that if you have a mayor, it's another level of government. It might be a light touch level of government, but it is what it is. How do we make sure that is genuinely open and accessible? I mean, most of the public don't know what the hell this is all about. There's a brilliant little excerpt on Today programme where they interviewed a woman there who said, and they asked her what she thought of the Northern Powerhouse. And she said, I think it's the electricity board just round the corner. You know, the lack of awareness is enormous here. So we've just got to be honest with ourselves that this risks being a kind of conversation between the powerful rather than a conversation with the public, if we're very, very honest about it. Unless we grapple with that issue, I think there's a risk that these things come undone from the bottom up, not from the top down. That is my genuine fear about devolution. So, two last points really. One really provocative one. London needs another devolution deal as well. You might say, why does London need it? We've not even had our first one yet, and I'm talking about their second. Truthfully, London, without devolution, will not sort some of its core problems, not least of which housing. Housing is in crisis in London. My personal view is, without massive devolution to the mayor and the boroughs, we will not sort that. And I've always held the view that if London doesn't succeed, nor can the rest of the country. It's not sufficient for London to succeed, but it's a necessary part of success in our core cities as well. So there's another conversation to be had. Now look, there's a tension for me in all this, I'll be frank. My heart says we should just get on with this. We need devolution. The time is now. Let's seize the opportunity. And I think there's some truth in that. I welcome the progress in Sheffield and in Leeds on deals. So I absolutely get that people have got to play with the game that's in town and make progress on that agenda and grab what they can. If we can sort the bus system out, which is a ridiculous model. Anybody, by the way, seen, I shouldn't say this, anybody seen the takeoff of the bus changes on Facebook? Anybody, put your hands up if you've seen it. Oh yeah, trust me, it is utterly brilliant. It's a takeoff of the film Mein Kampf. What's the film called? Not Mein Kampf. Last Days of Hitler, isn't it? It's called Downfall. With Hitler being overdubbed, railing about the bus changes in Sheffield. Trust me, it is brilliant. I laugh myself. I just suspect people in Sheffield, I can see James here, probably didn't laugh quite as much, but it is very funny. The point I'm making here is that this all can look a little bit kind of, what's going on here, is there a real shift of power? But if I was in the position that Sheffield and Leeds are in, I'd take the opportunities that are given to me. So my heart says take what's on offer, move it on, don't worry about the bigger picture. My head says that if we don't get better clarity about devolution in this country and what we're trying to achieve, then I think in the end it risks all ending in tears. So I think we have to have both taking the opportunities now, but paying attention to these big issues that are going to make a real difference to how this country, how UK fares in the future. I'll stop there. Thank you.